Welcome back to ABIC 2014. This is your second update for Tuesday. I'm your host, Bruce Sargent of Farm Boy Productions. This broadcast will focus on some of the innovations we found at the conference today. Our first interview is with David Irvin, Director of Research at Systems and Material Research Corporation in Austin, Texas. We talked about his topic, 3D printed foods from nouveau gastronomy to basic nutrition. I'm here with David, who just presented about 3D printing at ABIC. So why don't you give me a quick little overview about what you talked about today, and we'll kind of go from there.
Okay. The organizer invited me to come and talk about 3D printing food. It's a project we did for NASA. And the reason we used 3D printing food in the project for NASA was so that we can actually tailor the nutrition of food over long space missions. Since the micronutrients decay over time in meals ready to eat, the meal that you eat at day 1 of the mission is far more nutritious than at day 55 or 500 of a mission, unless you had some way to supplement it. So our idea was to use a 3D printer to reincorporate the decomposed micronutrients in food items that could be eaten on a daily basis, such that they could reintroduce the micronutrients that the astronauts were not receiving from their other food supplies.
So there's lots of spin-off potentials for this, obviously. One that you mentioned was hospitals. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Okay. There are several different conditions where a high carbohydrate diet or a high protein diet is detrimental to your mental condition. And the idea would be that, getting patients to comply with eating is actually one of the difficulties physicians have, saying, well, I've always eaten this way, I'm going to always eat this way. So if they could only provide them with the nutrition that they were allowed to have in a format in which they would appreciate, then patient compliance would be much higher, and therefore they would heal faster and the condition would subside.
Because basically you can take the daily nutrients that a person has to have and put it in any format that they want it in.
The idea is that you would be able to basically, if they're supposed to be on a vegetarian diet, you can make it look like a cheeseburger. And
then you also mentioned how this can be applied for, like a humanitarian or a disaster setting.
I challenge the audience to come up with ideas on how to use 3D printing or the idea of micronutrient control in either famine mitigation, disasters, after, just providing basic nutrition after disasters, or other let's see, when crops fail, they would be able to supplement the nutrients. And I'm not sure how it's going to happen, but I'm really excited to see who's going to come up with the idea and take it to fruition and solve some of the problems that are going to be facing the food industry over the next 10, 15, 20 years.
So on that note then, any plans for the future with the business, or any hopes?
We're going to still work on the micronutrient control and just get that aspect of the system running. There's a lot of people out there working on a lot of different things, and so there's a lot of space for people to play. But right now our plans are just for the micronutrient control, and specifically for space applications at this time.
Okay. Well, I think it's a great way to look at the question of feeding the world into the future and how we can do that with 3D printing. So thanks for taking the time to talk with me today.
Well, thank you.
Up next is Simon Warner, the Chief Scientific Officer for Oxitec Limited. He presented on applications of Oxitec technology in the biological control of agricultural and public health pests. Simon, thanks for sitting down and chatting with me. You just presented about how we're using insects and biotechnology in insects to control populations. So why don't you give me a little bit more detail on that?
Sure. So I gave a talk on how our company's technology can be applied for control of insects, which are problems for public health and agriculture. And I kind of led with really our lead product, if you like, which has got recent approval in Brazil. And basically that's a mosquito, and the mosquito transmits dengue. Dengue is a major world disease now, 390 million cases a year, and in 1% of those cases it can lead to mortality, so it's actually pretty serious. There's no cure known. So one route to controlling that disease is through controlling the mosquito that vectors it. The mosquito is called Aedes aegypti, common name is yellow fever mosquito. what Oxitec have done is create an Aedes aegypti strain that carries 2 genes, one which allows us to follow the Aedes aegypti, and the other gene actually basically means that if we release males and they mate with females, that the progeny never make it to reproductive adults. So we call that a self-limiting gene, and it's basically dead end for that mosquito and all its progeny. So I talked about that and showed actually the recent successes we've had in successively larger and larger field trials, which ultimately led to us getting regulatory approval through CTN Bio in Brazil, which is great news. And then I talked about how the same technology can be applied in agriculture and agricultural pests, and some of those hard to control agricultural pests that really attack fruits and fruit farms, but also some of the broadacre pests. So I talked about that and finished off with a little bit of data at the end that we worked collaboratively with Cornell University on, showing synergy between BT crops, which is one of the main traits in GM crops, and our technology together.
So I guess the big concern with this technology is that when you're increasing the population of these pests, is they're going to cause more damage, but ultimately that's to bring the numbers down long term. Can you give me a bit of an idea of how many you put out there, how many that takes down?
Sure. So actually one of the things that kind of need to remember is that technology that we put in those insects, it means they're self-limiting. So we basically release adult males. And sure, the adult males could do some damage, but actually mostly in agriculture it's the caterpillars or the larvae that cause most damage as they kind of hatch from the egg, and that's the most damaging stage. So actually the adults don't really cause that much crop damage, fairly minor compared to the caterpillars that come before it. They don't last too long, so they don't persist in the environment very long. So by the time we release the males, they really want to go and do one thing, which is go and mate with females, which is what we want them to do. So the damage to the environment or damage to the crop is actually really minimal because they do not persist in the environment, which is kind of very unique. It's quite different to GM crops, for example, which can persist in the environment. So hopefully that answers your question. It is pretty different.
Yeah, that does make sense. So then the next logical thing is cost. What does it actually cost to do this, and is it sustainable?
Yeah, so I got that question from one of the members of the audience, and the way I answered it was to say, well, actually this already exists. So this technology, or twist of this technology, has been in existence since 1950s, where sort of sterile insect technique has been used to eradicate New World screwworm, and actually more recently in the US it's been used to eradicate pink bollworm, which is a cotton pest between the states of Arizona and California. Between the states of Texas and California. If somebody said, well, what is the cost? And it kind of let them know that really, in terms of agriculture, you've got to get the cost down to below $500 per million insects, or around that sort of level, so that you can be cost competitive with basically with chemistry. But it very much depends on it. It's by pest, by crop, and it depends on what the population of the pest is in the crop per acre. So it's not a hard and fast number, but it's a rough number.
But it's still competitive with using a traditional method that might not be as effective.
And if it wasn't, then these eradication programs would never exist.
Yeah.
So I gave you two. I'll give you another one. Mediterranean fruit fly is another one that's been controlled using this sort of similar technology, the sterile insect technique. So there are factories that make insects. I know that sounds kind of bizarre and kooky, but they really exist. And there's a big one in Guatemala. It pushes out up to 5 billion insects a week. So that's the sort of production level.
Wow.
It's big.
Wow. So in closing then, how can people find out more information about your work?
www.oxitec.com. So yeah, look us up, Oxitec.
Yeah.
And actually we publish a lot, we talk a lot, and we never turn down any journalists that want to talk to us. We never turn down anybody that has a question. We're very open. We we engage with pretty much everybody, and we're happy to answer anybody's questions. So please do that. And we have a info@oxitec.com email address as well.
Perfect. Well, thanks for taking the time to talk to me today.
All right. Hey, thank you.
Thanks for watching. Your next broadcast for today is on policy topics.